Thank you, Matteo, for this really interesting lecture. We are moving on with the waLBerla application. So this was an example of a waLBerla application in our MultiXscale. But now Alan will present in a short presentation how this is supported with EESSI.
Yep, let me just get started here. Share my screen. Share. Okay, so I just have a very brief presentation to talk about how we can support the kind of work that Matteo's doing in the context of EESSI. So in general, talking about waLBerla, but kind of taking a general approach first before I talk about some specifics. So again, I go back to this concept of productivity. So before I talked about what it was for developers, now I'm talking about a little bit about for the scientists themselves. So relieving them of the burden of installing software again and again and again. So thinking about that perspective, so I mentioned before about deployment, right? Talking about deploying software and doing that somehow in a continuous way, right? So when we make changes to our code, being able to deploy that and run that in a production environment. Specifically, what I wanted to mention was that the production environment for EESSI, so software.easy.io, that's meant for production codes, right? So our plan is not to deploy codes that are not ready for production in that environment, right? So we want to provide an additional mechanism for people who are actually developing an application, right? So that means that probably means that perhaps there's no release, there's never been a release of that application, or that there's release candidates, right? So you have an existing application, but you're making further developments, and then you have a candidate that you think would be a good production code, but you want to test it extensively without making it really a production code or publicly available. So how could we support that? So what we've come up with in the last few months is something called dev.easy.io. And that's, so Kenneth mentioned this briefly as well. But basically that's a location where we can deploy codes that are not ready for production, or maybe have some other restrictions related to that application that makes them not suitable for the production repository. So this is a work in progress, but we are pretty close to being ready with this, right? So we already have a documentation pull request open that discusses how you would do this. So I think this is something that will be piloting as a service. We are already piloting it as a service, but will be more extensively documented in that sense very soon. This requires collaboration with EESSI to actually set up. So you don't need to collaborate with EESSI to be able to use the EESSI environment right now. You can already use it in lots of different environments. Like I use it on my laptop, I use it in a virtual machine. You can use it in the cloud, in CI, all these places. You don't need to communicate with us to be able to do that, right? This would not be the case for dev.easy.io. If you want to use these services, you need to talk to us, and we need to collaborate and set things up together and figure out how we could move forward. So multiscale in this case is the one that's providing is what we're using to drive the development of the service in general, and it is providing the pilot applications for that. So what can dev.easy.io provide? Well, one thing it provides is something that hasn't really, I don't think, been discussed yet, is something called the EESSI bot. So the EESSI bot is a tool that allows you that does all the management of submitting build jobs to all these different architectures that we have access to. So the bot is the one, so in GitHub, you talk to the bot and say, hey bot, run me a build on this type of architecture with that type of a GPU. And the bot can go away and do that for you. We'll run the build and we'll report back on whether that build succeeded or not. So that's what we use to deploy software. That's how we do the automation part of what we deploy. But also we can create these EESSI bots as a service to applications and codes as well. So it can do those builds on different architectures for you, including on GPUs. Dev.easy.io can provide a space for you where you can install and manage your own dependencies. So if you have some particular requirements, or you're considering including new dependencies that are not shipped by default with EESSI, you can install and manage those dependencies for yourself. And then what we can do is also deploy and release candidates for different architectures as well. So this is a temporary deployment strategy. And so it allows you to deploy an application code for some period of time, but there's no guarantee that it will exist there forever, right? So this allows you to test things like scalability, to do benchmarking, to do performance tests on large scale systems as well. So what dev.easy.io is not is some space where you can do whatever you want. It's not just some location, some directory where you can park any files that you want. And you have to take a certain approach to how you're doing this right now. So what that means is that you need to use EasyBuild recipes. So you need to use EasyBuild itself, but you need to use EasyBuild recipes to deploy your code. And because that's what our bot is built up to our. I mean, other possibilities exist, but that's where our experience lies, and that's what we are supporting right now. And obviously, the more that you do with your test suite, the better the job that the bot can do for you. So if you have a test suite for your code, your EasyBuild recipe supports running that test suite, then the bot can run lots of tests for you and can report them back to you. Okay, so the better the test suite you have, the better the job that dev.easy.io can do for you. And specifically talking like about waLBerla applications, so you can see from what Matteo said that waLBerla is a framework, right, for multi-physics applications. But the application that Matteo talked about was a very specific use case, right? So he's creating a code that has a very specific use case. So in that sense, it's not really well suited to like a production release concept because he's simulating a very particular system using this framework. So it doesn't really suit like shipping that code in a production environment. And then as we've also seen, like a lot of his performance or what he's interested in terms of performance, a lot of that is coming from GPU usage. And getting access to high-end GPUs can be tricky, right? So Matteo's lucky he's sitting in Leonardo, who have access to all the systems at Ginica, but he has GPUs available to him. The typical the free tools that are out there in terms of like CI, so what we saw like GitHub Actions and Git to some extent GitLab as well, and they are never going to have these kind of GPUs just lying around available to you for use for free. So when you're developing something like a CUDA code, you have a problem in the sense that you need access to the hardware to actually do a full set of testing. This access to dev.easy.io can help you to do that, right? So it can do some kind of level of CI, but also the CD for all these different platforms as well. So it can be used to help you to develop, but also to deploy the application that you're interested in. And so in the case of Matteo with waLBerla, that would mean deploying in dev.easy.io, running your simulations from there, because Matteo is still in obviously a development phase, right? We're not close to production quality yet, but he can deploy something already that he can test on different systems as well. And so that's it. I wanted to be brief, but to give you an idea, so in the same way that we talked about that showing you how easy is used, it was the most informative way of showing you what it can do. And we'd like to do the same thing for dev.easy.io. So I'm going to hand over the floor to Kenneth, who's going to walk you through a little demo of how that works right now.
All right. This is going to be very quick. So just to give you an idea, Alan was mentioning that bot that we have. And as I mentioned, this is still in a proof of concept sort of stage, but I can already show you what this involves. So what you're really doing when using dev.easy.io and getting pre-release builds of software into Easy is you open a pull request that would look something like this. In this case, it's actually a lot bigger than typically would be, because here it also includes the Easy config file that would be fed to EasyBuild to tell it what to install. The key aspect here is that we're using this software commit template to basically tell EasyBuild which source tarball it should be getting from GitHub. So this is going to be a commit ID, and that can be a different commit ID every time you do a build. So you need a specific type of Easy config file that takes that into account. And then the key thing here is really we give you, or we let you specify a small YAML file that specifies which Easy config file should be used and which commit should be fed to EasyBuild to actually do that installation. So when you make that pull request, and then you ask the bot to build it, you'll quickly get a response that says, oh, build means this to me. That means I submitted a Slurm job on the build cluster. And you'll see a report like this. Eventually, the job will start running. And after a while, depending on how complex that software is, of course, you'll get hopefully a successful report back. It will tell you what it checked for, and it will also tell you what the result was. In this case, we get an additional directory under dev-easy.io and a module file that corresponds to it. If you actually look how that looks like on the system, so here I'm back on Vega in a small 4-core session. I'll set up the easy environment again, like we did before. In this case, I want a CPU-only node, so there's no GPUs. And what I'll also do, and this is still proof of concept, so we haven't set up a proper initialization script for this, but the dev-easy.io repository is also available here. So not the software repository where we have the production builds or production releases of software, but a separate repository, which has a very similar structure. And in here, you can see right now we only have builds for AMD Zen 2, AMD Rome, which is what we have here on Vega. And we can find some modules for this here. For now, I need to do a manual module use on this to make this set of modules also available. And if I then check which modules are, oh, I don't want to do this, that's going to give me way too much. If I check which ESPResSo modules are available in my current environment, it gets a bit angry at me for doing cancel there. We see we have the same ESPResSo modules as we have before, corresponding to release versions of ESPResSo, but also a pre-release build or something that could be a pre-release build. In this case, it's actually the exact same commit as the 4.2.2 version, available through dev-easy.io. So if we want to run that same example we did before, I can load modules again, but rather than loading the CUDA module that we had for the, let's say, release of ESPResSo, I can now pick this pre-release build, load that same set of modules. And it may take a bit longer now because it now has to grab some stuff from the dev-easy.io repository, but I should be able to get that running. And let's see if I run this across the 4 cores I have available, it should be running. I also want to show you that it's actually picking up the installation here from dev-easy.io. So if I look for a binary provided by ESPResSo, I'll actually find it here, and you can see that long, ugly commit ID here as well, of course. And if I try running this, it should be running just as if it was a released version of ESPResSo, let's say. So I can play around with this and experiment with it. So hopefully you should see that starting. So that's kind of the workflow you would get as a developer. You would open a pull request, and it will be up to you when you open this pull request and when you request the bot to do these builds. For now, we're being a bit careful, and there's humans in the loop as well that need to confirm the deployment, for example, of that build. But eventually, we hope we can go to something that can fully autonomously build and deploy. So you just talk to the bot and you say build, or maybe build and deploy. And as long as the build works, it will happily deploy it in dev-easy.io for you, which means that everywhere where dev-easy.io is available, yeah, you completed that run. Everywhere where dev-easy.io is available, in a matter of minutes, you will be getting those pre-release builds in place, and you can start experimenting with them. So that's the kind of service we're also looking into actively at this time.
Okay, Kenneth, thank you very much for this presentation.